Hey guys, and welcome back to the Yes Means Yes podcast. On this week's episode, we have guests Lauren Parker and Dustin Johnson on. We're going to be talking about suicide and sexual assault because September is Suicide Awareness Month. So we just want to spread awareness and talk about it because of the statistics regarding instances of suicide after a sexual assault occurs. So as usual, my name is Faith Nongchef. I'm a victim advocate and outreach coordinator with Rape Counselors, and I'm going to let everyone kind of go around and introduce themselves. If Cassidy, you don't mind starting.
Yeah, my name is Cassidy Powell, and I'm a volunteer with Rape Counselors of East Alabama.
Hey, I'm Amanda. I work with Rape Counselors of East Alabama with Faith, and I am the part-time outreach specialist.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Dustin Johnson. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I'm the Assistant Director for Outreach and Campus Mental Health Initiatives at Auburn University Student Counseling and Psychological Services.
Hey guys, I'm Lauren Parker, and I serve as the Vice President this year for Active Minds at Auburn.
So Lauren, for anyone listening, can you kind of describe what Active Minds is?
Yes, so Active Minds is a national organization, and they have chapters across campuses, college campuses all over the country. And Active Minds, their initiative is to really change the conversation about mental health. And we support mental health awareness and education for young adults, and that's kind of our focus in our meetings.
So we're going to hop right into the questions. The first one I have is, have you, either of you, and this is open even to Cassidy and Amanda too, have you guys ever had any personal or professional experience where someone was sexually assaulted and then they had contemplation of suicide or any suicidal ideation?
Well, I can speak, Dustin. Yes, I've had professional experience working with survivors of sexual assault, and then the development of suicidal thinking or suicidal ideation coming from that. In fact, I read that there was one study in 2012 that said sexual assault has been found to lead to an increased risk of death by suicide by as many as 14 times for women specifically who have been assaulted versus women who have never been assaulted. And while it's not as dramatic of an increase, the same holds for men as well. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely one of the things on my radar when I'm speaking to a recent survivor of a sexual assault or any type of interpersonal violence or domestic violence is to see, okay, what kind of impact has this had on the person? And oftentimes, a lot of the emotional states and thinking that tends to accompany suicidal thinking, emotional states like feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, perceiving yourself to be a burden on other people, worthlessness, pointlessness. You know, when a situation happens like somebody's sexually assaulted, it could really lead to them feeling dehumanized and less than person. And so I understand that those feelings may start really popping up for someone who is a recent survivor. And so I'm definitely looking into asking about those questions of are you feeling hopeless about your situation, helpless about your situation? How's your self-worth and things like that? And sometimes that can lead to people saying, yeah, and it's gotten so bad, I've considered ending my life. Mm-hmm. Definitely something that's on my radar as a clinician.
Mm-hmm. And that's good that you're aware, because I feel like something that we kind of constantly see is that people aren't aware of how prevalent sexual assault is and how often it does happen and then leads to behavioral health or mental health issues. So it's really good that you seem like you've definitely taken the steps to inform yourself about it. So how common, just for a general average person, would be the contemplation of suicide or suicidal ideations?
Well, and I can speak from at our counseling center, about 30%, maybe 1 out of every 3 of our students who come in and complete our paperwork process and get connected with us as a client of our center, 1 out of 3 had endorsed having considered suicide at some point in their life. Defining what a suicidal thought is kind of adds to that question too.
Mm-hmm.
We capture a broad kind of range of thoughts that we could consider suicidal in nature. We have what we call active thoughts, where somebody actually thinks about ending their life and maybe even recognizes a manner in which they could do that, ranging from that to the more passive thoughts of, I wonder how people would react if I weren't here. I kind of just want to get away from everything. I just want all this pressure, all this stress, all this heartache to go away. I want to just go take a long walk in the woods and not come back for a while. Those aren't exactly thoughts of ending one's life, but it does, demonstrate that somebody's thought about, I could get away from this pain and struggle, maybe even on a permanent basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we think about it that way, the thoughts of suicide are a lot more prevalent than people would think, even though they may not have any intention or even specific thoughts on their life. And I think it's important to know that those thoughts can happen for most people, because it takes some of the stigma out of suicide. It's like, okay, I may have not had thoughts of actually ending my life, but there have been times where I felt so overwhelmed that I just wanted to get away from everything. And then that gives you an empathy point to connect with somebody who might be experiencing more significant suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm. I like how you touched on the stigma, because I feel like there's so much stigma surrounding any mental health issues, but also we see that so often with sexual assault. I mean, you guys might experience this too, that we go to events and people avoid our table. They will walk out of their way to not come near us because we have rape on our thing. So yeah, I think stigma is a huge part of it, and definitely something that we as professionals need to work to eliminate.
I just wanted to add on what Dustin was talking about. I definitely think contemplation of suicide and suicidal ideations are a lot more common than people think because of the stigma, because people don't feel comfortable sharing what they're thinking. And that's kind of what we do at Active Minds, is we really want to erase the stigma so people feel more comfortable having conversations about it. And then I just brought some two stats from Active Minds, the national website. So suicide is the second leading cause of death among young adults. And 67% of people ages 18 through 24 with anxiety or depression do not seek treatment. So I think that's one of the important things that we can do, is try to change that so people do feel comfortable getting treatment and talking to other people, because that's a start so we can stop it.
Definitely. Yeah, 100% agree. So in your experiences too, have you guys seen gender or age? Does it look differently for men and women, like signs or even statistics of prevalence?
Yes. Women are about three times more likely to attempt suicide than men. And men are about 2 to 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Okay. So the difference there is that men tend to attempt suicide using greater lethal means, particularly firearms. Mm-hmm. The experience of having suicidal thinking and even suicidal contemplation may occur more frequently among women. But men, it's really a concern about means and helping restrict their access to firearms, to proximity to train tracks, things like that. And I also want to point out too, for anybody listening to the podcast, I think that maybe in answering some of these questions, I may reference some things if we have anybody who has survived a suicide attempt or they've been touched by suicide in some kind of way. We may mention something that could be provoking for you. If you need assistance, we can talk about that. There are ways to get assistance immediately through calling certain hotlines and things like that. Mm-hmm. So heads up about that. But yes, I think there are some gender differences related to the experience of suicide in terms of attempts and deaths by suicide. In terms of age, Lauren had talked about it is the second leading cause of death, not only among college students, but also in young adults from that age range 15 to 24.
Wow.
It's also pretty prevalent. It's a lot higher prevalence rate among older adults as well.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers for suicide are slightly increasing every year. And of the top 10 causes for death, it's overall number 10. It's the only one of the top 10 that is not going down year to year.
Mm-hmm. So this is just kind of like a side question and something I'm curious about. Do you think that COVID will have an impact on this?
Well, certainly, I want to invite everybody to answer. Certainly from my perspective, it could make an impact in terms of support that would otherwise be available to people. Maybe it's a little harder to connect with that support. So for example, if a survivor of, is having a really difficult time, sometimes a close friend would be able to come over and just kind of be there and help and be present. And that's a little bit harder to do in these digital times. Still certainly not undoable. I mean, certainly something that can still happen. I mean, we're meeting virtually to have this podcast, where in the past we might have met in a studio or something all together. So there's certainly still ways to help people feel connected and connect with each other during a time of crisis. But I think losing that to some extent does increase potential risk. Obviously, there's a lot to feel stressed about. This pandemic has created quite a physical and financial strain on people. The financial strain, can definitely create a situation that can feel really hopeless and really helpless. Like I feel like I'm drowning in debt, or I lost my job. There's not really opportunities, and you can feel certainly that the world is closing in on you. Physical health can definitely, if that declines and deteriorates, can lead to, an increase in hopelessness and helplessness. And like we said, those emotional states really tend to drive suicidal thinking. So there's definitely some stress that's unique to the pandemic that could create a greater risk. And there's also opportunity to prevent that risk that may be coming out of this pandemic. I think that, our counseling center, for example, we've taken this opportunity to enhance our digital delivery of services. We're doing more to get stuff out of the counseling center and to people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some greater opportunity to reach people that haven't been reached before. Lauren said earlier that 67% of people with, some diagnostic features, they don't seek out help. Might be a little easier to seek out help knowing you don't have to leave your bedroom to do a session. You can do it on Zoom now. So there may be some factors too that the pandemic is, some silver lining of the pandemic is forcing us to deliver services in a more accessible way to people than maybe it was before.
I also think, especially the time when we were under strict lockdown, that had a severe effect because people were so isolated, and you really don't know if someone's having suicidal ideations and they're isolated. You, as a friend or a family member, you don't see the signs of it because you don't see them. So that can become dangerous. So that's why it's important to be able to have those conversations and erase the stigma. So if someone is having those thoughts, they know that they have someone that they can talk to and kind of stop it before it gets to a point of no return.
I was actually reading some research that was published not too long ago about this theory of suicidal ideations that's twofold, with belongingness and burdensomeness. And this idea that those who have suicidal thoughts or attempt suicide have this need to belong, and they feel like they don't belong. And then coupled with that, they feel like they're a burden to those around them. And so with situations like the coronavirus, that kind of separates us physically. There's that idea like, I don't want to reach out because I'm a burden to them. But like, I also really want to belong in this social group. And so knowing that can help people reach out to those that, you know, might have those suicidal thoughts or ideations, because, you know, they're not going to reach out to you because they feel like they're a burden. And so with it being virtual, it's a lot easier to make a phone call than it is to actually physically meet to go get coffee or, you know, whatever. So kind of like what Dustin was saying, I think that there are some silver linings and easier ways to get connected and support one another in the pandemic. And so there is some silver lining in that, but it definitely has its challenges as well.
And thank you, Cassidy, for mentioning that theory, the interpersonal theory of suicide. Because yes, those two factors, and when you think about survivors, gosh, a sexual assault or assault of another person, that is the ultimate interpersonal boundary violation that occurs. And so I would think that for our survivors, those two factors, thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness, are especially difficult and challenging, a concern for them. You're trying to trust people again, when you're trying to date again, if a dating partner has completely violated your trust, your attempts to belong to people, your attempts to connect with people are thwarted. They're affected by that experience. You might feel emotionally and mentally disconnected whenever you try to connect with people after having survived, a sexual assault. And so you might feel like you've been robbed of some of the tools to connect with people because of that experience. Plus the perceived burdensomeness, if you feel like less of a person, if you feel dehumanized, if you feel objectified of that experience, it could be somewhat easier to perceive yourself to be a burden. So, back to Cassidy's point and Lauren's point as well, like we really could use this opportunity to work hard. If experiences caused people to believe themselves to be a burden, new experiences have to help people feel like they're not, and teach them that they're not. And so really setting up these opportunities, again, it looks differently now, but it's not completely different. I mean, we're even changing that term social distancing to physical distancing, because you're not actually distancing socially, you're just physically being out of the presence of a person, but socially, you can still continue to feel connected through different ways, like virtual ways.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that y'all touched on that kind of like was pointed out to me, the burden, this is something like you guys reiterated that survivors feel. We did a podcast with a survivor, and it will actually, I think, be released later this week. And that is something that she heavily touched on, her feelings of being a burden to her family, to her friends, not wanting to reach out. And I think the metaphor she used was she was carrying 500 pounds and she didn't want to give 250 to them, because what if they were carrying 500 pounds and now they have 750? So I definitely think this is something that we work towards, and that's part of the reason, we have a 24/7 hotline. So if you feel like you can't unload those burdens on someone else, give us a call, any hours. So yeah, I definitely think those were really good points brought up, especially about the burdening. When talking about sexual assault survivors, there's kind of long-term effects. And one of these is, fear of STIs or even potential pregnancies that would result as because of a rape. Do you guys think that this can contribute to someone becoming more suicidal, experiencing more suicidal ideation than maybe other instances in which someone would have mental health issues?
Back to a person's experience of stigma and maybe internalized shame.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for an STI, a person may feel like this damaged me. I'm not the same. And I didn't ask for this. And that perception of being broken, that's a hard one to overcome. And I can imagine that would bring up a lot of challenging emotions for the survivor. And obviously a lot of the work that, I'm sure you all do and we do at the Counseling Center at Auburn is helping the person that feeling of brokenness is just perception, and helping to work to rebuild the sense of self and appreciation of the self that maybe got damaged by that experience. So I can understand how, contraction of an STI could lead to that feeling. Also, obviously, when pregnancy happens, boy, that could bring up, especially when it's unexpected, could bring up a lot of stress and a lot of decision making and a lot of grappling on, what do I do from here? And I talked about that example about the financial stress and things closing around someone and they're feeling really boxed in. I can imagine that feeling would be prevalent in a situation like that.
Any other thoughts? Anyone else?
I just wanted to add that I think that any kind of sexual behavior or experiences is very taboo in our culture today, in our society. And I think that really contributes to the stigma, and, kind of supports this whole idea that like you have that internalized shame, and this idea of almost worthlessness, that, comes with those experiences. And I think that just having conversations like these, and this podcast can really just help have that conversation of this very personal part of someone's life, and making that something that you can talk to other people about. Going back to that burdensomeness, talking to someone about something you experienced can be easier in some situations. And when we're dealing with more personal things like, some kind of sexual trauma, I mean, that's something that you don't talk about. That's just something that, in society today that you don't bring up. And I think that's really important to break that stigma.
I also think just because, a lot of the times, survivors have lost that control, or they feel they've lost that control. And so that's why, like at Rape Counselors, we really try really hard to, when we're going through the process with them, helping them gain that control back. It can be as simple as just making a decision. Do you want to talk to the police? Do you want a counseling referral? What can we do to, what can we help you with? That we're just trying to give them that control back because they feel like all that control has been taken from them. And so we want them to feel like they are still in control of their life, because it's a very scary thing to think about, losing control of yourself and your surroundings. And so that is so important, because that affects all areas of your life when you feel like you're out of control. So we really try to work really hard towards that.
Yes, I agree with what Amanda said. Second that. So as advocates, as people who are professionals, we want to change things. But also there are just bystanders in the community who have to help us with this. It has to be a joint effort. But what can we do, and what can even people listening do? How can we provide an environment where survivors of sexual assault feel comfortable talking to people instead of coping with either these suicidal ideations or stuff by themselves? Like, how can we change the environment to where they feel like they can talk to us?
Well, I think my goal in answering questions for this podcast today was to try to make it a little easier for people who might have to intervene and be that bystander who helps someone out who's having crisis. I tried to think about how could I answer these questions in a way that would help give them tools to have that conversation. So one of the things I think, Cassidy had touched on this, and I had mentioned earlier about there are emotional states and interpersonal states that contribute to the development of suicidal thinking. So if a survivor is experiencing that and they tell you about it, there are some certain things you can do to help that person in the moment that even go beyond simply asking about the thoughts. As I had mentioned, people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, they're tending to feel hopeless about their situation. So obviously, one thing you can do is if somebody's expressing like a lack of hope in things, you can help instill that hope. If somebody's think nobody's here for me, you can still say like, well, you reached out to me, so you must believe that I can help you, and I will help you, and I will be here for you, and I'll be that starting point for feeling some hope again. Helplessness is another one. Obviously helping get people to resources, not just professional resources, but also really good personal resources too. Like, okay, let's go take a walk. Like, you haven't gotten out of your house all day. Just any kind of resource that just kind of helps get people moving and get out of the tunnel of thinking and emotion that people can find themselves into when they're overcoming despair. Perceived burdensomeness. I mean, obviously that's another point, is to let people know, like when they're saying like, I don't want to give my burden to you. And it's like, well, we're sharing that together, and I'm willing to take that on, and I want to take that on, and we can share that together. You're not just giving it all to me. We're both in this together. So helping to assure people of that, and then just kind of recognizing like that thwarted belongingness too, is here's a situation where you and I are going to belong together. We're not thwarting this. Like, I'm sticking by you. I'm here. This one's going to work. You can trust me, and I will not betray you. I will not betray your trust. Not like others have. So I think just reassuring people of that, validating their personhood. You deserve to get recovery from this. You deserve to survive. I'm glad you're here. I believe you. I listen to you. I hear you. A lot of that affirmation and validation. You're when somebody's been depersonalized, when they've been objectified, just reminding them that, to me, you are a whole person, and I even if you don't feel that way sometimes, even if you can't quite muster the emotions, to share that, you're experiencing a common situation with a person, even when that's hard to communicate, I still know you're there with me, and I'm not judging you.
Mm-hmm. I like that you said, I believe you, because that is something that we at Rape Counselors try to foster so much, to create an environment where survivors are believed. Because going back to that stigma, it's very, very common for someone to dismiss a survivor, and to say that assault didn't happen because that guy would have never done that. Maybe you're thinking too much into it, et cetera, et cetera. You did this, blah, blah, blah. But we really want survivors to know that we believe them, because we want them to seek help. We don't want them to internalize it. And and we say this probably every podcast, but I still am going to say it again. If you are the first person that a survivor tells their story to, it is so important that you let them know that you believe them, because that sets the tone for their healing process. They likely will not tell anyone else if you react poorly. You have to give them that positive interaction, and you have to keep giving them positive interactions to change how they're feeling. So that's definitely, I loved that you said that, because I was about to bring it up and I was like, good, that's a nice little segue. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this question?
I just wanted to add that I think that sometimes people really avoid this conversation of, suicidal ideations or some kind of trauma. And if the victim wants to, talk about it, definitely be there and listen and say that you believe them. But some of supporting someone with any kind of suicidal thoughts or ideations may not look like sitting on a couch and telling them everything that they thought about today. I mean, it might just be sitting and watching a movie together in silence. It might be going on a walk. It might be, just being flexible in that conversation, and going at the speed that the other person wants to go at. Because there's this idea that, I'm not a counselor. I don't know how to help them. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to make it worse somehow. And so I really just want to, encourage everyone listening that anything is helpful. Any kind of just, feeling like you belong. And some people might not really want to talk about it. They may say, like, I'm really struggling, with getting over this, but I don't want to talk about it. Or like, they just seem different. And it's okay to not, address that conversation maybe at first, and just be there as their friend. If you're not a professional counselor, like, you don't have to pretend to be one. You can just be there for them, and that goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I want to add to that too, about suicide specifically. If the situation, again, it might take a little bit of a build up to talk about it. Like it might take just a few outings, spending some time together, talking more in general, working the way up to the question of, are you having thoughts of ending your life? It's still really important to ask that question if you suspect that someone is experiencing suicidal thoughts, or if they're kind of like hinting around it. In fact, when we do suicide prevention training on Auburn's campus, the first step is to ask the question and to be very explicit in the question of, are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of ending your life? Are you thinking about suicide? Even more so than the more vague, are you thinking of hurting yourself? I mean, getting really specific of, are you thinking about the finality of your life, basically? And the reason why to ask that question directly, and again, it might not just be coming right out and asking it. It might take a little bit of work to get to asking that. But what can be really powerful about asking that of someone is it's very relieving to them. You're sending the message that it's okay for us to talk about this if you are experiencing this. If they say no, then you're obviously not going to push the question anymore. But if they say yes, they may have felt like, okay, I wasn't going to mention this, but now that, Cassidy mentioned it to me, now I feel like I've got an invitation to talk about it. I feel like she's not going to judge me. She wouldn't have asked about it if she was going to judge me on having these thoughts. So I think it can be very relieving, although very tough, to maybe ask that question directly, but it could really go a long way in helping somebody if they are having significant thoughts of ending their life.
Can you explain what QPR is? Because this is kind of like the training you'll have for Auburn's campus.
Yeah, so QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer. And so the idea behind it starts by asking that question. So if somebody's in crisis, maybe they'll say something like, I just can't do it anymore. I feel like throwing in the towel. Then you may ask a more specific question, like, when you say that, are you referring to suicide? Are you thinking of ending your life? And asking that question very directly, so that, again, we take the stigma out of it, we take the judgment out of it, we help the person feel more relieved to start talking about what's really going on. And then from that point, after you ask the question, the persuasion part is about helping the person take some steps to change that thinking, or to address that thinking. And those steps, so it's just like helping people to understand that, if it's thoughts of burdensomeness that's leading those thoughts, then you can say, well, you're not a burden to me. Or if it's hopelessness, helping to talk about, reasons for the person to live, like what gives you hope? Well, it's my dog. Like, who's going to take care of my dog? So you jump into this scenario where, again, you're not necessarily being a therapist here. You're just helping the person connect with, reasons to fight those thoughts and to keep living. And then the referral piece is when you actually get the person connected to resources, professional resources. Sometimes it might be, in the interim, non-professional resources, like we said, like it could be something as simple as like, okay, I know you're having a tough time right now. You've been drinking a lot. Let's stop drinking right now. That's gonna not lead to anything positive in this experience. So that could be kind of the referral, is a decision to change some kind of behavior in the moment. But obviously it can also lead to, let's get some professional help here. So that could be, calling rape counselors, could be calling, if you're an Auburn student counseling and psychological services, we have a 24/7 assistance by calling our number. Could be calling 1-800-273-TALK, the national crisis hotline. Could be texting on the national text line, which is 741-741. Just taking any kind of steps. Could be seeing your old therapist. It could be going to talk to a physician about medication. It could be anything. It could be going to the hospital. Could be anything that really helps the person in the moment. So you ask the question, you persuade them to maybe get some help and to tap into reasons for living, make a commitment to get through this with you, and then refer them to relevant resources. And then the important part after that is check in on them and make sure that, hey, you went and saw a therapist for the first time today? How'd it go? Was the therapist any good? Did you connect with them? Did she listen to you? Did he listen to you? Did they listen to you? And check in.
I also think, just like in the time that we are in, especially with COVID-19, I know we hear this all the time about be kind, but I think it's so important just as humans that we go out, and even a smile can change somebody's day. I mean, you can be at the gas station pumping gas, and just smiling and saying hello can make somebody's day so much better. And so as being a bystander, you can always just little things like that, and trying to be more mindful of your surroundings and the people around you, because we all go through things, and sometimes people are going through a lot more harder things than others, and you just don't know where they are in that day. And so I think it's so important to just always be mindful of being kind and always smiling, and because you just don't know, you could change somebody's day from them leaving that gas station or leaving wherever they are to do something, because they didn't feel like there was any hope. So just giving a simple smile could be a hope for someone.
Yeah. Did you know, Amanda, that a smile gives you more of a serotonin boost than a bar of chocolate? And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that makes you feel happy. So imagine getting a smile from somebody and that making you smile, what kind of impact that would have, for sure.
That's awesome. That's so awesome.
Yeah, I think it's just important now, just check in on your people. Watch out for your friends. Make sure you're taking care of the people in your life that you care about. Just doing little things, texting them, stuff like that. But so
Can I touch on something?
Yeah, of course.
Active Minds is, in addition to QPR, Active Minds has something called VAR training. And VAR is validate, appreciate, and refer. And it kind of just touches on what you all have been saying. It's, you don't have to wait for someone to have suicidal ideations to have that conversation or that intervention with them. If you see that you have a friend who is struggling, it can be an everyday struggle, this training really gives you the tools to be able to have that conversation. Because I know it's hard for a lot of us to know, am I saying the right thing? How can I really help someone? Am I even in a position to be able to help them? And so I'd encourage anyone, if they're interested, VAR, we have it on the Active Minds National website, and we also give trainings. This most recent Monday, Health Promotion and Wellness Center, we just had an all-day training day for different things. So I think it's a really useful tool to help people.
That's great, because I think that is something, the most common thing you hear is, I just don't know what to say. Or I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing and it's going to make it worse. So it's good that you guys are doing that and getting that out there. So we're really towards the end of our podcast. We always have one last question that we ask to end it. Before we do that, does anyone else have any comments, anything they want to add? Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, we thank you guys so much for joining us, and we do this on every podcast. We want to know, what is y'all's message to survivors of sexual assault?
Well, I hope that this podcast today, listening to this, if you're a survivor, I hope it gave some hope, instilled some hope for you. What you've been through has, people have been working to try to help intervene and studying on the best ways to do it. if you experience suicidal thinking, suicidal ideation, if you're recovering from a suicide attempt, or you've ever contemplated suicide, we're working to try to help everybody in our society intervene to help. And so I hope that message of hope came out of today. I understand that in talking to survivors that, that experience can really fundamentally change how you view yourself, how you view other people, how you view the world. And sometimes when the stress happens, when that burden, that 500-pound burden you're carrying, really closes in on you, it's hard to see past the tunnel of darkness that can create. So if you're feeling a sense of hope in hearing this today, I encourage you to take out a notebook or a journal if you have it, or just something, and write down those reasons of why you matter, and that's still here, even though it may feel like that's been taken away from you by somebody else. Ways that you feel more of yourself, ways that you feel more in control, like Amanda said. Write those things down. Write those reasons for living down. I'm here for myself for these reasons. I'm here for my children, my family, my pets. Believe it or not, that's a big reason to live for many people, is, who's going to take care of my pets. Write all of those things down, because when you're in that kind of dark tunnel, it might be hard to recall those reasons. And once you write it down, tell somebody you trust that I've written this stuff down. And if I ever am in a tough time and you become aware of that, point me back to this notebook. Help me remind me of why I'm here and why I matter. Because I know sometimes my mind's not exactly going to bring me to that place, and I'm not going to really feel like I'm in that place to believe that stuff. But I do matter. And I would say this to all our survivors: you do matter. And I, even if it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
I think I would say, I think it's really important to stress that we believe you. You are not alone. You don't have to suffer in silence. I think a lot of times people keep it to themselves because, as we've talked about throughout this podcast, people do think they're a burden. And just assured that you are not a burden, and there are those of us who are committed to helping you and helping you through that process, and just being there right beside you. They may not know how they need help, but if they know that there's someone who's willing to walk with them, that can be extremely helpful.
And I just want to add kind of to what Dustin said, that there's always something positive in every day, even if some days you have to look a little bit harder for it. As a survivor and as someone that might be struggling with suicidal thoughts or ideations, take each moment, each day, day by day. Think of the next hour, think of the next 24 hours, and think of what's positive in that moment, and think of, short-term goals. It seems like a mountain in front of you when you're having to overcome something like that. And just thinking of it as every mountain is just a bunch of little pebbles, and you just have to move it one pebble at a time, and you can move that mountain. And so I would just charge survivors just to think of the small positive things in each moment and each day, and just take it day by day.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed doing this podcast. And for our listeners below, I'm going to be putting the resources that Dustin mentioned, those lines and everything, in the box, so you guys don't have to worry about looking them up or anything. But again, we thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.